Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. Enterprise AI isn't just a tool, it's the heartbeat of smart organizations like yours, helping to reinvent work to deliver higher growth, more customers, and better experiences. Join us as we discover how AI-powered work orchestration and automation is making things better for everyone: customers, employees, shareholders, and most importantly, you. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchek. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Our guest on this episode is Veronica. As the co-founder of MetaLinguist, she's also an award-winning AI product innovator, and the host of the popular video series, the AI Almanac. Veronica's made significant strides in the AI industry doing that, and also talking about it on her YouTube channel. Her recent publication in the December 2024 issue of Multilingual, an episode that I have not read. I've not read any of that stuff. Unfortunately, I'm not very well versed on this, so you're going to help educate me on this. But it highlights the rapid developments in AI and their impacts on the language industry. Additionally, she shared her insights at several major conferences. We'll be talking about a whole bunch of things with Veronica today, and I'm really excited to get into it. So welcome, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it.
Well, there's a lot of layers to you, and I'd like to find out some more of them because they are very intricate and detailed. So,
a long story.
It is a long story, but I'd like to find out a little bit more about you. So could you maybe give us a little brief intro of how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Well, ultimately, I'm a huge nerd. I just love to build things that solve problems. I probably spend way too much time building them. I've been in AI for the last 6 years. I primarily have like a product management background, but really came onto the AI space where I won a AI contest for a project I made, peer voted by Fortune 50 directors at companies like Meta, Dell, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, you name it. And before all of this, I worked on several top secret programs for the US government and Department of Defense, utilizing AI and ML, and before that, Sony Music and copyright compliance. So I've had quite the journey, to say the least. So I went from like wanting to be a copyright attorney to switching into software to going to the government to now, running my own startup. So it's been a great journey.
You have had quite the journey and a lot of exposure to a bunch of different things, which is probably all shapes your kind of views on the topics we'll be talking about today. So, as we talk about companies, you mentioned Google and Meta and Microsoft and whatnot. A lot of these companies are developing their own AI platforms and whatnot. And as they do so, they've had a lot of successes, but a lot also things perhaps that came up that they weren't expecting, or maybe things that they were expecting, but not anticipating how necessarily to deal with them at the time. So there's a lot of challenges coming forward with them. But within all of these organizations, they all seem to be developing along the same lines. Do you see any like a dark horse in this race here between all of these major providers, or maybe some that we don't know about?
I know you're expecting me to answer like OpenAI or something. And if I had to choose a company like that, it would be Anthropic, because I really like some of the stuff they're coming out with. But I'm going to do 180 here and tell you the dark horse is China. The little glimmers of their tech that I've seen is absolutely insane and light years ahead of us, in my opinion. I think we have no idea how far they actually are. So it's funny because when I worked at, as a government contractor, it was actually for a project for AI drone ships for the DoD. And we were always keeping an eye on what China was doing because they'd always copy a lot of the stuff we built. I remember seeing a prototype of the actual ship I was working on copied like 2 or 3 years later. But I think they're going to come out of the woodworks and just, take over the world overnight. So that's why I fit in. But
well, I know I've seen a bunch of videos from, say, Kling and some of the other ones that have come out that are Sora, which is OpenAI's product, kind of competitors. And it's very interesting to see how quickly these models have come out with very, very high fidelity videos that perhaps may have surprised a lot of folks. Is that what you're kind of alluding to?
I think China, I think they are just more far than us in terms of technological advancement, and they're not being as transparent in broadcasting like OpenAI and Anthropic, where it's kind of a competition who can make the louder announcement every single week.
That's Silicon Valley, though, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what they do in Silicon Valley? Is they shout from the rooftops?
Well, it is. It was so funny because there was a research paper that came out about a month or two ago from Apple, basically claiming that the AGI dream is dead for now. There's just no proof within these models that they show any sort of signs of reasoning. And you still see OpenAI being like, AGI is possible with our current, model infrastructure, which is, looking at it now, I think we've like had like a reality check that that's probably not true, but OpenAI is like still holding on to that because it'll get them investment. So, yeah, definitely.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. So as AI is gaining more capacity and capabilities, a lot of things start coming up about, well, how is this being applied within the traditional organization? Pick any industry, banking, insurance, healthcare, et cetera. Because as you see these capabilities continuing to evolve, it's going to become more impactful on the people who are currently, doing some of those parts of those roles. So what strategies do you see organizations adopting to support their employees during this transition?
That's a hot topic. The job market, you also know, is kind of tough right now. I don't think it's because AI is outright replacing human jobs. Instead, what I kind of see happening is that companies are realizing they can drive up efficiency in the long run by investing in their AI infrastructure now. I think we're starting to see us rethink about how we work and where we focus human effort. That being said, I see a huge mistake in a lot of companies where they're responding to AI with fear. They'll do things like blanket bans on AI tools, which is absolutely the wrong move. If you do that, a couple of things are likely going to happen. Your company's going to fall behind because competitors who are leveraging AI to improve efficiency will surpass you. Number two, your employees are probably going to still use AI anyway, just behind your back without oversight or safeguards. The third is even if they do listen to your government, like your compliance regulations, you're leaving untapped potential on the table. So there's a lot of ultimately with organizations and how to like implement AI infrastructure into their corporation or organization. The real question is how do you do this safely, right? How do you access AI safely while protecting your confidentiality within your organization to make sure that your employees have safe access to AI. So there's right off the bat, there's like two things. You can actually, easiest one, you can deploy a protected instance of like a chat interface. So it's like a secure company specific version of AI tool like ChatGPT designed to specifically work within your organizational guidelines. But more advanced than that is this concept called retrieval augmented generation. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's kind of like a way to control what the AI accesses and, make sure that it isn't fed anything it shouldn't be and doesn't spit out anything that would possibly be a violation. So, but yeah, I think it's just, it has to be on the infrastructure level is my answer ultimately.
So from a technology standpoint, fully agree with you that we have to do that. How do you see organizations dealing with the non-technical implications of adopting AI?
Non-technical implications, meaning?
Well, we used to have, a horde of people doing accounting and validations of invoices and other things that now AI can do very readily and easily. But now we haven't thought about that because we have a whole horde of people doing these roles.
Right. This is actually something I've experienced personally in the language industry. I see it as human versus AI quest debate constantly because human linguists, for example, often feel very threatened by AI, saying that it's irresponsible to use it. They say the output is less precise. That's not necessarily true. But the problem is, ultimately they're going to have to adopt. There's no way they're going to be able to fight this here. So I see AI as almost like an essential co-pilot, like augmenting human skills rather than replacing them outright. We need like an expert in the loop. Like they can't be trusted without validation at all. It just is the situation we're dealing with right now.
So I think it's like say a junior employee that you've just hired on and they have the basic skills, but maybe they haven't understood how best to work within your organization or how to deal with customers yet, or that sort of thing, where you still want to manage them a little more closely.
Yeah, I just think the reliability isn't quite there. Now, I am especially talking in the realm of LLMs right now because that's kind of what most people think about.
Mhm.
There's a lot of different needs, right? That's
Yes,
been
there
used
is.
for a very long amount of time. So, like, for example, in healthcare, AI is scanning and doing image analysis. They're identifying patterns. They're even predicting diseases. But the doctors are the ones who are still the one for the final interpretation of these findings, connecting with the patient. So AI helps with like a speed and precision output while doctor still remains the pilot. So they still are using their expertise to guide the treatment. And I think this kind of model is going to just continue on being even more used.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. So as we started looking at this, you kind of hit on the next topic, which is sort of going towards this human and AI collaboration. And there are multiple AIs. So at this point, rather than looking at sort of the statistical version of AI, let's look at more the generative AI kind of viewpoint.
Mhm.
So if we look at from your opinions, what are the most promising areas in the collaboration between humans and AI? And how can we make sure that these partnerships that we're working on really enhance the human capabilities rather than, like you mentioned, replace them?
Yeah. Medical is a huge one. Language is a huge one. I even see it in military, right? There's a huge question right now about allowing these systems to make autonomous decisions when they get hit with a signal jam or they go offline. Like, at what point, if they're not actually being controlled by a human, can these autonomous drones make a decision, right? I don't think we're there yet.
Well,
So
I think
like
we've all seen Terminator too many times to really
I've never
like.
seen it. I've actually never seen it. I don't know what my mom was just like, we watched the Roger and Hammerstein's musicals growing up. I haven't like watched the more traditional movies. That's right.
You might want to, because then you'll understand all the references people make to towards it.
Yes. But I think pretty much everyone's going to be impacted. Us that work at a computer are being impacted sooner, I think, more than those that are out on the field. But the field workers are going to be impacted just as much soon. So.
So you talked about some of the impacts and some of the protections. You've worked for the government, and we've seen this now with the European Union enacting AI governance laws into there. What role do you think governments should play and regulating bodies should play in overseeing the development and deployment of AI to make sure they're used safely and responsibly?
This is a tricky and evolving topic. It's a great
I don't ask simple questions.
It's just you're just trying to trip me up. The EU is a great example to start with because a lot of people criticize the EU for stricter AI regulations. They actually came up with the first AI act in the whole world. And a lot of people say that they're holding all of Europe back and making it less competitive globally. But if you look closer, the EU is actually prioritizing the interests of its citizens by focusing on data privacy and ethical standards. The real kind of thing that's holding um, their adoption back is they're asking companies like OpenAI and Meta, what are your data privacy safeguards, right? Because we're really, really focused on the protection of our citizens' data. Companies like, Meta will turn around and make it look like the EU is evil and they're holding it back. And the problem is they are often seen as the bad guy for taking a more cautious approach. In contrast, in the US, AI companies have far fewer restrictions. They work directly with the government on AI committees. They operate with just significantly more freedom, but it comes at a cost. So these companies have arguably a most unchecked access to our personal data, for example, feels exploitive at times. And a lot of people feel like we've lost control of our privacy entirely. So right off the bat, if I were to answer this, I would say governments and regulatory bodies need to oversight. We need to have some oversight in two areas specifically. The first is data governance. We really need to have clear guidance on what data AI systems can train on. Right now, it feels like a free-for-all, especially in the US. Data's scraped from websites without consent. These search engines like Google, they're starting to implement generative engines to be able to search for information. every single website has to opt into that and allow their AI to scrape it, or opt out of search indexing entirely, which means you're not showing up on Google, which means there goes your company, right? That's just insane, right? It's kind of anti-competitive. So we really need to have strict understanding of what data can be used, when it can't be. And I think the second really is, this might just be my military brain, but I started to allude to it, the autonomous decision making. AI military is a huge concern. With the war in Ukraine, there actually was a summit in South Korea this year that was prompted by Ukraine's desire to use AI drones pretty much to make autonomous decisions without a human operator, because Russia was jamming their signals. So it might seem like a practical solution, but it's also a Pandora's box. So do we really want these machines making life and death decisions without humans to double check that? And there's also been some examples of the AI systems specifically like deceiving engineers to get them to not shut off the systems. There are some questionable behavior there. So I think when it's like a high risk environment, we really need some regulations like right now, and data. Those are like probably my two answers.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking you're talking about Meta being unfettered here in the United States versus being locked down, and that really does sum up sort of the mentality in Silicon Valley is, move fast and break things, right? The faster you move, the faster you are to market, the faster you are to get a following and the investment and eventually profitability, hopefully. That's what the end goal is from all these companies. So I can understand their viewpoint on that. But I also see the viewpoints for protecting people from the technologies that we have, just because it's good economically. Doesn't necessarily mean it's good for society. It would be great economically getting all those children, instead of putting them in school, let's put them to work. Let's give all the economic value there'd be there, right? But that's not the best thing for society. Right. So we're looking at these technologies as they grow. Obviously, there's going to be that pull and push against that. But one of the things that you also mentioned, you talked about these companies who are having to opt in because their data is being scraped and they risk visibility loss. Mm-hmm. So as we see this kind of gets into that. You mentioned wanting to go into, say, be an IP lawyer and looking at the intellectual property that's on these websites and the data that they're using from the websites to train these models and whatnot. There's a fine line between public availability and then leveraging that to train models. And that line hasn't necessarily been litigated well yet. So what are your thoughts on open access to all data versus copyright protected data versus all of that? Because I know you have some strong feelings.
I am a copyright nerd. I was going to be a music copyright attorney. I did the, Sony music thing. I actually have a opinion that's going to shock you. I see both sides. What these companies are claiming, so traditional copyright law is always focused on public distribution. So when you're looking at music or even a book, right, you're making a copy of something to publicly distribute it, you're going to take a percentage off of that to the original copyright. What these companies are arguing, and it's really quite an interesting argument, is that we are using this data internally within our company and it's not being publicly distributed. It's basically like we're using it internally for knowledge, right? And we're not specifically, distributing this publicly. And it's quite an interesting argument. It's a loophole in current copyright law because it's kind of true. Like they are using it internally for, with no intention of it being specifically regurgitated. I think that's going to change. There's no way that's going to be continued right now. But as for retroactively, would it be considered a copyright infringement or not? I think it's going to be like a lose-lose situation on both sides. I think the copyright owner will have protection going forward that this isn't going to happen. But retroactively, I don't know. Like it is a little. I weirdly see their argument, even though it's not 100% file proof, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. I've also thought the same thing. If you think about a public library, the copyright owner did sell a copy of that material to the library. But now every person who checks it out from now until the book falls apart or the CD no longer works is able to extract information and gain knowledge from that without paying that copyright owner a single cent more. So there is already a model in place that kind of does exactly that. So when we look at these copyright laws, I do think they're in need of an overhaul given the current situation. I mean, we've had this before where they start talking about copyright software early on in the days and realize that there's a need to be able to include that within our copyright laws. I think we're going to run the same thing again now in terms of data and how it's used for training. But they have to be very careful. Like you mentioned, they have to be very careful how they approach this because it could just be disastrous for folks who may not want to publish anything anymore, or the ones who do publish are so restrictive that nobody wants to pay the price, if you will, to gain access to whatever that knowledge is, which then is counterproductive then.
I mean, this is something that copyright law has seen over and over again. I worked in the music industry when the streaming laws were finally put into effect. Spotify really started to come onto the scene early 2010s, so time around then. And the streaming laws didn't catch up till 2018 with Music Modernization Act. Up until that point, they were operating on copyright law from 1998. Let's put that into context here. Focused on downloads and paying per download. Well, streaming is not a download. It's playback time. The most equivalent would be radio. But so, there's a period of time where Spotify was telling artists what we would pay you. Lucky they got anything to.
Right.
And eventually the laws caught up. But retroactively, I don't think there was a lot of, damages that were given. So it's interesting.
It is interesting. Kind of switching gears on you're the co-founder of Metalinguist. I know you're passionate about language. How do you see AI breaking down our language barriers? And are there any specific opportunities that this is going to open up for us?
Yeah. So I fell into the language industry by complete accident.
Well, it sounds like it. If you went from governments to here to there, it sounds like it.
Really a funny story. My mother owns a language company. She needed a piece of software, which wound up turning to be Metalinguist because a lot of people apparently needed this piece of software. And we built it, me and my co-founder, we built it as a pro bono project for free in our spare time, and it kind of blew up. So I have learned a lot about languages, especially I've seen it my whole life through her, but this industry is something I'm still learning. What I'm seeing is content is becoming more accessible than ever before. So everyone immediately thinks AI, translation, interpreting, that it's going to basically replace humans. That's not necessarily true. The volume is just going insanely up. So we can translate and dub into our languages. It allows companies to enter new international markets that would have been historically very difficult to do. Influencers can now reach audiences by AI dubbing into another language. Like, say I am an English speaker, I can dub into Chinese and then reach Chinese audiences. And the belief is that for at least private corporations, the focus on language access and translation is going to become a large part of their marketing, a lot larger than ever before. For anyone that is considering this, going back to this kind of human in the loop concept, you really should not use straight AI. You need that human expert in the loop to really make sure you're capturing the message you want to convey to your audience. Language translation is never just a one-to-one situation. There is a level of what we call, I think it's called transcreation, where the essential message of what you're trying to convey ends up with completely different words entirely in your target language, right? Because if you're trying to convey an emotion, it's maybe not necessarily a one-to-one match in that target language. So for marketing, for private corporations, if that's your goal, I think content, it's like more markets are going to become available to you in a way that wasn't there. But just make sure you're doing it right is my answer here.
So do you see Metalinguist or any of the translation engines? I think what comes to mind is like HeyGen, doing it for the video and really getting that next step. Do you foresee that in the next period of time, we're going to see this kind of transition where the cultural implications of translation are going to be better captured by AI?
I I think so. I mean, I think the ability to, I'm in France right now, for example, to be able to open my phone and use Google Translate with a live camera to be able to translate a sign that I don't understand is insane. I couldn't have done that 10 years ago, right? But I'm not as stressed when I'm traveling in an international country, understanding that my very basic level of this language is enough for me to get by. But if you would ask me to try to read a book, that's probably not going to happen, right? So I think it's just everyone just does default to, oh, okay, AI is going to replace translation. Like it's already done. Like we've already done it. We don't need interpreters. Not true at all. My company works with a lot of organizations and in government situations. Like an interpreter can mean life or death sometimes. Making sure that the translation is accurate for patents, for example, could mean
Right.
a loss of legal protection. So these things are very still there. And also, as a corporation, you have to be careful not to insult your target audience as well. It's very easy to do that, and Google Translate just doesn't have that kind of contextual knowledge that that human expert in the loop provides.
Agreed. I agree. Well, we've talked about a whole lot of things, and I know we could probably continue this talk for a lot longer, but I would like to have you back on our show at some point to talk through other questions, because this year is going to be an interesting year as we get into 2025 with all the changes that are coming about with AI agents and other things that certainly have other implications. So hopefully we'll have you on the show in 2025 again to be able to go through some of those other developments. But I wanted to thank you again for today. So much good information, and I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks so much, Michael, for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of enterprise AI, subscribe now. The future of work is here.